The town of Black Hollow existed in a part of the desert where even maps seemed uncertain. A place marked only by faded lines and warnings scribbled in pencil rather than ink. Most people who passed through never noticed it at all. They drove past the exit without remembering why they had slowed down, or they turned off the highway for gas and later swore the town had not been there when they looked back. Black Hollow did not hide itself. It simply refused to insist on being real. The buildings stood crooked and tired, painted in colors that had once been bright but now looked like memories of color instead. The air always smelled faintly of dust and iron, as if something had bled there long ago and never fully stopped. Ethan Graves arrived at Black Hollow because he was running out of places to run. His career as a journalist had collapsed after he published a story about a missing persons case that no one else could verify. The family denied ever existing. The police department had no records. Even the photographs he had taken showed empty rooms where people had once stood. Accused of fabricating everything, Ethan lost his job, his credibility, and eventually his sense of what counted as proof. When he found an anonymous tip in his inbox containing nothing but a set of coordinates and the words "they went somewhere," he followed it without hesitation, because at that point, being wrong felt safer than staying still. Black Hollow greeted him with silence, so complete it felt staged. No engines, no voices, no wind through trees, only the faint hum of electricity from somewhere underground. The gas station was open but unattended, its digital sign flickering between prices that made no sense. The diner across the street had lights on inside, but no movement. Ethan stepped out of his car and immediately felt watched, not by eyes exactly, but by something like attention itself, as if the town were aware of him in the way a dark room is aware of someone turning on a flashlight. The motel clerk never blinked. She smiled too long, spoke too slowly, and asked for his name 3 times, even after he had written it on the form. When she handed him the key, her fingers were cold and slightly damp, like they had just been pulled from deep water. "Don't use the mirrors after midnight," she said casually, as if reminding him about checkout time. Then she paused, frowned slightly, and added, "Actually, don't use them at all." That night, Ethan dreamed of a second town layered on top of the first. Same streets, same buildings, but everything was abandoned and decaying, as if time had accelerated violently. Shadows moved without boding, voices whispered through walls, repeating fragments of conversations that felt intensely personal but impossible to place. He heard his own voice in the dream, begging someone to open a door, and woke up standing in the middle of his motel room, hand pressed against the bathroom mirror. The reflection didn't move when he did. It stared at him with his face, but older, paler, eyes slightly too large, like something wearing his identity rather than inhabiting it. The reflection smiled slowly and mouthed a single sentence without sound. "You finally came back." Over the next few days, Ethan noticed things that didn't add up. People in town repeated the same routines at the same times, ordering the same meals, asking the same questions, laughing at jokes he never heard. The radio played news stories about events that hadn't happened yet. The newspaper headlines described deaths from years in the future, including one that mentioned a journalist found in a motel room with no visible cause of death. The photo attached to the article was blurred, but the outline of the body looked disturbingly familiar. When Ethan tried to leave Black Hollow, the road looped back into town. Every direction led to the same main street, the same diner, the same motel. His phone showed full signal, but no service. GPS insisted he was in the middle of the ocean, and at night, he began hearing footsteps outside his room, slow and dragging, stopping just outside his door, followed by gentle knocking that never quite formed into a rhythm. The motel clerk eventually explained, in the same tone one might use to describe bad weather, that Black Hollow was not a place people visited. It was a place they returned to, and the reason no one remembered leaving was because most of them never really did. By the third night, Ethan could no longer distinguish between the waking world and the town's twisted reflection. The motel room seemed to stretch and compress while he slept, the walls breathing just enough to make him question whether they were solid or alive. Mirrors multiplied around him, one in the hallway, one in the bathroom, one that seemed to float in the corner with no frame. Each reflection was slightly wrong, his eyes too dark, his shadow too sharp, a grin that didn't belong to him. And every mirror whispered, not words at first, only faint sighs and scraping sounds, like fingernails running over walls made of glass. Then the whispers formed sentences, soft but insistent. We know your name. We've waited for you. Don't be afraid. Ethan tried to leave, but every exit dissolved into a hallway he didn't recognize. The doors he opened led him to rooms he hadn't seen before. A classroom where chalk wrote itself on the blackboard, spelling names of people he had met in passing, strangers whose faces he felt he should remember. A church filled with empty pews, yet the organ played by itself, hammering chords that resonated in his chest. A train station packed with passengers in period clothing, all staring silently at him, mouths moving without sound. Time was fractured. The sun rose and set within minutes, and yet the night never fully arrived. Black Hollow existed in a state of permanent twilight, where clocks moved backward. Footsteps echoed twice, and shadows sometimes detached from their owners. He began seeing them, the dwellers of Black Hollow. At first, they appeared at the edge of streets, barely more than dark smudges, their faces obscured. Over time, they grew more defined, men and women frozen mid-motion, children reaching for doors that would never open. Each one carried a faint aura of familiarity, like someone he had known in a dream or read about in an old newspaper. They didn't speak, but their eyes followed him insistently, urging him to move in ways he could not name. And always, somewhere in the air, a faint hum, a collective voice, layered with hundreds of tones, whispering secrets he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Ethan discovered the town's library, a decaying building, roof half collapsed, windows like black eyes staring into the street. Inside, every book he touched contained a diary entry, a confession, or a letter he swore he had written himself. Yet he remembered never having written any of them. Page after page described his own failures, his guilt, his regrets, even events that had yet to happen. The words shifted as he read, forming new sentences that seemed to anticipate his thoughts, rewriting themselves to include new fears. It was as if the town itself knew him more intimately than he knew himself. And then he noticed the photographs scattered across tables, images of him sleeping, of him walking, of him looking into mirrors taken by someone who had always been there but never existed in the world outside. He slept less. He stopped asking questions aloud. Even thoughts felt dangerous, like speaking in his mind could alert the town. Shadows pressed closer. Footsteps followed him in empty streets. One night, he glimpsed himself walking ahead of him, slightly pale, slightly delayed, smiling with a serenity that he did not feel. The figure turned and waved, and suddenly every reflection he saw waved back. The mirrors, puddles, window glass, even the polished diner counter. All of them replicated his movements a fraction of a second late, yet always a little wrong. He realized in terror that Black Hollow didn't just reflect the living, it copied them. Perfectly enough that he couldn't tell where he ended and where the town began. By the fifth day, the whispers spoke directly. The town had learned his language, his voice patterns, his private thoughts. They told him stories he hadn't lived, naming events in his past that no one else could have known, predicting tiny movements before he made them. "You will turn left at the corner," they would say, and he would, afraid to disobey. "You are tired of being alone. Come with us." And in the diner, the air shimmered, revealing dozens of figures seated at tables, all with his face, all with subtle differences, all smiling politely, as if they had always belonged there. Ethan realized something horrifying. Black Hollow didn't trap souls. It didn't kill. It absorbed identity. Every person who arrived became part of the town's memory, a living record that could be summoned at will. Their bodies remained outside, perhaps wandering elsewhere, forgotten by everyone. But their essence, every fear, every hope, every quiet regret, lived on in the streets, the mirrors, the shadows, and the town never stopped collecting. Every whisper, every reflection, every footstep, all were evidence of those who had wandered too far, those who had been noticed, and those who had come back because the town had called them. That night, Ethan approached the town square. The clock tower had no hands, yet it rang 12 times, with no one pulling the bell. Figures lined the streets, identical yet subtly different, past arrivals. Faces long erased from memory, watching him silently, and then, from the shadows, a voice not his own spoke directly. "You will stay. You always stay. And you will forget that you ever tried to leave." The darkness of the town felt alive, pressing against him, rooting into his bones. And for the first time he understood the true nature of Black Hollow. It was not haunted by spirits, not by ghosts of the dead, but by the living everyone who had ever truly seen it, who had ever truly believed in its silence, now trapped in a reflection that could never let them go. Ethan could no longer tell which nights were real. Time in Black Hollow had become a liquid thing, pooling and dripping over itself in patterns that made no sense. Hours stretched into centuries, in a single blink, and sometimes seconds, condensed into eternities. The streets repeated themselves endlessly, like an old film reel caught in a loop, with the same lampposts flickering, the same cracks in the asphalt, the same gusts of desert wind, carrying the faint smell of dust and old blood. Every night, the shadows grew bolder, stepping closer, mimicking the motion of his own limbs. When he ran, they ran. When he stopped, they froze, lingering just long enough to remind him that they were patient, that they had all the time in the world, and he had none. One evening, or what he thought was evening, he found the old town hall, a massive structure of blackened stone and rotting wood that had somehow stood intact despite the decay everywhere else. Its doors were unlocked, creaking as if they had been expecting him. Inside, the walls were lined with hundreds of portraits, painted in the style of the 1800s. The figures were townsfolk who had come before him, each framed in perfection, each looking directly at him with uncanny recognition. When Ethan approached, he realized with horror that the faces were all his own. The brushstrokes captured not only his appearance, but also subtle emotions: fear, curiosity, exhaustion, despair. It was a gallery of himself, multiplied and frozen in every conceivable expression. An archive of every visitor Black Hollow had ever claimed. On a table at the center of the hall lay dozens of journals. Each one was opened to a page describing a moment from Ethan's life he hadn't shared with anyone. Events from childhood, adolescent embarrassments, private confessions, whispered in the dark, everything recorded, as if by an invisible hand. Trembling, he picked one up. Reading aloud a line he did not remember writing. "The first time I thought the desert was beautiful. I felt a longing I could not name." As he spoke, the words echoed through the hall, and the portrait's eyes blinked, as though alive, registering his acknowledgement. The realization hit him cold. The town learned through observation, memory, and repetition. It fed not on fear alone. It consumed knowledge, identity, and attention itself, rewriting its archive with every living witness who wandered its streets. The whispers began again, louder now, more insistent, threading through the walls, the floor, the air itself. "Do you remember us?" one voice asked. "We remember you." Shadows detached themselves from corners and ceilings, forming figures who walked alongside him silently, matching his steps exactly. Some wore the faces of strangers. Some bore his own. Their mouths moved, forming words that weren't spoken aloud. "You belong here now. You've always been here." The town was no longer subtle. It wanted acknowledgement. It demanded recognition, and the more Ethan resisted, the more aggressively it pressed, wrapping around him like roots sinking into soil, unrelenting, patient, eternal. He tried to flee. The main street twisted under his feet, corners folding into themselves. Buildings multiplied and shrank, alleys became stairways that led nowhere, and at every turn he glimpsed windows showing scenes of his past moments he had blocked out. Grief he had buried, secrets he had never shared, and in the distance, the town clock tower rang again, though the hands were still missing. 12 tolls echoing endlessly, a call he could not ignore. At the base of the tower, a figure waited, tall, featureless, its body a blur of shadow and dust. When Ethan stepped closer, it gestured toward a side street he hadn't seen before. His heartbeat echoed like a drum, matching the tolls of the invisible clock. The side street led him to the outskirts, where the desert began, but even here, Black Hollow had stretched its reach. Sand shifted unnaturally, forming outlines of buildings that weren't there. The wind whispered secrets he couldn't fully hear, but understood instinctively. Names of those who had entered before him, their last thoughts, their regrets. He realized, in terror, that the town was not confined by fences, by roads, or by maps. Black Hollow existed wherever it needed to exist, tethered to consciousness, not geography. And Ethan was tethered to it now. As he stumbled, exhaustion overtaking him, a faint light appeared ahead. It was the diner, glowing unnaturally, like a beacon. Inside, the walls reflected not reality, but possibility, mirrors showing different versions of him, each carrying choices he had not made, lives he had never lived. The air inside smelled of coffee, dust, and iron, the perfect combination for nostalgia and dread. He understood immediately that if he entered, he would see all the alternate versions of himself, all the paths not taken, all the ghosts that Black Hollow had already claimed. And he understood, too, that the town would not let him leave, no matter which path he chose. Then the whispers formed a chorus, voices layering over each other. "It's time. You cannot leave. Stay with us." And for the first time, Ethan realized the truth. Black Hollow didn't just consume identity, it needed it. Each visitor, each observer, each hesitant step reinforced its reality, expanded its influence. It was not alive in the way humans are. It was alive in the way memory, obsession, and fear can be alive eternal, hungry, and patient beyond comprehension. And in that moment, standing before the diner, Ethan's reflection in the glass didn't move. It waited, and then it smiled. Inside the diner, everything was slightly off. The tables and chairs were real enough to touch, but their edges blurred when he tried to focus, as if the world itself couldn't decide whether to render them fully or keep them half-formed. A bell jingled above the door, though no one entered, and the coffee machine hissed steam without ever filling a cup. Behind the counter, a figure stood, an old man with skin like dried parchment, eyes pale and luminous, and a smile that didn't reach his gaze. He spoke before Ethan could ask a question. "You've come far, but you've always been here. That's the way Black Hollow works. We remember the living, and they return." Ethan noticed the menu posted on the wall, but the items weren't food. Each line listed names, dates, and small confessions. Marielle, 1924, feared the dark. Thomas G., 1978, betrayed his brother. Unknown, waited too long. He realized, with creeping horror, that the diner didn't serve meals, it served memories, and that these memories were not just written, they were living, preserved fragments of everyone who had ever entered the town. Every patron who came, every waiter who served, every face on the wall existed somewhere in the town's web, trapped in layers of perception and recollection. The old man gestured for Ethan to sit, and a sudden compulsion made him obey. Around him, shadows gathered, forming vague silhouettes of people, some transparent, some as solid as flesh. They whispered, but not in words he could understand. The tone of their voices carried memory itself, longing, fear, hope, regret. He felt them pressing against him, brushing against his mind like wind through empty streets. One shadow touched his shoulder, cold and heavy, and he recoiled, only to realize the shadow was familiar. It moved like him, remembered him, and seemed to carry pieces of his own past he had tried desperately to forget. "You think you can leave?" the old man said, voice echoing unnaturally. "But leave is a word that means nothing here. Every step you take adds to the town. Every glance, every breath, every thought strengthens it. Black Hollow is not haunted by ghosts. It is haunted by the living. And now you, like all who came before, are part of the pattern." Suddenly, the lights flickered, and Ethan saw dozens of doors along the walls of the diner, each leading to a different scene. A forest on fire, a child standing alone in a hallway, a stormy cliff overlooking a turbulent sea, a house filled with laughter, and then silence. Every door was a moment in someone else's life or his own, twisted and reimagined. The shadows moved toward the doors, passing through them as though drawn into the memories, vanishing from the diner but leaving a faint echo of sound behind, a laugh, a cry, a whispered name. Ethan realized that the town didn't just reflect reality, it stored it. Every life, every memory, every choice became a layer in its structure, endlessly looping, endlessly observed. Panic began to claw at him. He tried to speak, to ask the old man how to escape, but his words dissolved in the air. He felt the diner stretching around him, expanding into hallways and staircases that led nowhere. Mirrors appeared on every wall, each one reflecting not just him, but multiple versions of himself, subtly different. One smiled cruelly, another trembled with terror, a third mouthed words he could not hear. And then the reflections started moving independently, stepping from the mirrors into the diner. Ethan ran, but the doors, the shadows, the reflections all converged, surrounding him, enclosing him in the awareness that Black Hollow had already claimed him. And then, in the center of the diner, the old man lifted his hand, and a soft whispering began to fill the room, not from the shadows, not from the walls, but from Ethan himself. Every thought he had tried to bury, every regret, every fear, every memory he had tried to erase, emerged in a chorus of soft, insistent voices. He realized, with frozen clarity, that Black Hollow did not need to chase him. It only needed him to exist, to remember. The whispering grew louder, layering over itself until it became nearly deafening, until Ethan's knees buckled and the floor seemed to rise beneath him. And then, a single phrase emerged from the chaos, perfectly clear: "Welcome home." The shadows receded slightly, the reflection stilled, and the old man's smile deepened. Ethan understood, in that moment of horrifying lucidity, that he had entered a place that existed outside time, outside geography, and outside death itself. Black Hollow didn't just trap the body or the soul, it trapped awareness. And he, like all who had come before, was now part of the town's endless, patient consciousness. And somewhere, deep beneath the streets, the town waited for the next traveler to wander in. The following day bled seamlessly into night, or perhaps night had always been day. Ethan could no longer tell. The streets outside the diner had changed again. Buildings warped and shifted as if they were made of sand and fog rather than brick and wood. The sky above swirled with muted colors, bruised purples and deep grays, casting the town in an otherworldly gloom. Ethan walked, compelled by some invisible force, toward the outskirts, where the old cemetery lay. Gravestones jutted from the cracked earth at impossible angles, some etched with names he recognized but had never spoken aloud, others bearing dates centuries into the future. And beneath the earth, a faint hum vibrated through the soil, a heartbeat that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his own. Among the tombstones, he encountered a figure that moved differently from the shadows he had seen before. It was a man, tall, ragged, dressed in clothing that seemed from another century entirely. His face was gaunt, eyes dark wells of something between sorrow and malice. He tipped a wide-brimmed hat. "You're new," he said. His voice was gravel, scraping against Ethan's nerves. "Don't be afraid. Not yet." And yet the man's presence carried the weight of centuries, as if he had wandered Black Hollow since its first incarnation. He spoke of the town with familiarity that terrified Ethan, the original settlers who had vanished, the fire that had burned the first diner, the storm that had drowned a family in the old Hollow Creek. Each story was more grotesque than the last, yet spoken with unnerving calm. "You'll learn," the man continued, "that Black Hollow is patient. It doesn't need to hurry. It doesn't need to frighten. It simply observes, waits, and reminds." He gestured toward a section of the cemetery where the tombstones were not aligned but twisted in spirals. "Those who enter here," he said, "don't just come and go. Their lives fold into the town. Their memories become streets and walls. Their regrets carve rivers in the sand. And if you're not careful, you'll become a landmark yourself." Ethan felt a chill gnaw at the base of his skull. He glanced at the gravestones and saw faint movements, small, almost imperceptible, like shadows twitching behind the letters, echoes of lives trapped and echoing eternally. And when he looked closer, he realized with growing horror that one gravestone bore his own name. The date read decades into the future. The inscription described, with meticulous detail, the day he arrived, the way he wandered the streets, and how he would eventually disappear into the diner, becoming another whisper, another reflection, another memory woven into the town's endless structure. He wanted to run, but the ground beneath him had become soft, almost liquid, pulling at his boots like the roots of some immense underground tree. Every step forward sank him slightly deeper, as if the town itself had claimed a piece of him before he could escape. And then the whispers began again, familiar voices. Voices from the diner, from his own past, from the shadows he had seen in hallways and mirrors. But now they were joined by hundreds of others, voices overlapping, forming a symphony of memory and obsession. Some spoke warnings, some pleaded, some cursed, but every word carried weight, and every echo tugged at his mind. By the time he reached the center of the cemetery, Ethan was trembling, sweat and dust coating his skin. The tall man was gone, replaced by a massive mausoleum that hadn't been there before. Its doors were black as tar, faint inscriptions wriggling like worms along the stone. "Enter and remember." Ethan knew instinctively that the building held the core of the town, the locus of its consciousness. And inside, he feared, waited the voices of everyone who had ever tried to leave. He stepped inside. The interior was impossible. Corridors folded over themselves. Stairways led back to their own beginnings, and mirrors lined every wall, reflecting infinite versions of himself moving in conflicting directions. Each reflection whispered snippets of the past, present, and future, forming a cacophony that pressed against his sanity. And then, through it all, a single voice rose above the rest. It was calm, deep, and almost intimate. "Do you remember who you were?" Ethan tried to answer. He realized that he couldn't. He had forgotten names, faces, and events he had once believed unshakable. Every memory he tried to recall dissolved in the presence of the town, replaced by visions of other lives, other visitors, other versions of himself endlessly looping. Black Hollow didn't just erase, it rewrote, folding every visitor's existence into its ever-expanding network, consuming their identity in layers of perception. And yet, in that moment, a sliver of defiance emerged in him. A thought that had not been dictated by the town, a spark of awareness entirely his own. "I am still here. I am still me." The walls shivered. The mirrors trembled. The shadows recoiled slightly. Black Hollow sensed something it had not encountered in centuries. Resistance born not of fear, but of recognition. And somewhere, beneath the town, the hum that had pulsed through the desert soil grew louder, as if the earth itself was preparing to respond. Ethan wandered deeper into the twisting corridors of the mausoleum, the air thick with dust and the faint metallic temps of something long decayed. The mirrors multiplied, reflecting not just himself, but the walls, the floor, the ceiling, each surface fracturing into infinite reflections. In some, he saw himself smiling, in others, screaming silently, in some older, thinner, younger, or subtly wrong versions of himself that might have existed if life had taken other paths. Each reflection carried memories, fragments of choices he hadn't made, yet somehow still felt part of him. It was exhausting, and terrifying, and intoxicating all at once. Then he saw them, other visitors, or perhaps echoes of them, figures frozen mid-motion, some sitting, some standing, some kneeling as if in prayer. Their faces were pale, blank, or partially formed, as if the town had begun recording them, but lost interest halfway. A few looked directly at him, eyes wide, mouths moving without sound. One figure raised a hand as if to warn him. Another shook its head, a third whispered something, and though Ethan could not hear the words, the intent burned into his mind. Do not stay. He pressed on, deeper into the mausoleum, until he reached a chamber unlike the rest. The ceiling arched impossibly high, vanishing into darkness above. At its center stood a massive tree, blackened, gnarled, and impossibly old, its roots crawling across the floor and weaving through walls. Its branches stretched out and upward, dissolving into shadow, and the faint whispering of thousands of voices emanated from it, resonating through the walls. Ethan instinctively understood this was the heart of Black Hollow, the core of its consciousness, the source of its patience and power. Beneath the tree's roots, there were markings etched into stone, old as language itself, symbols that shifted when he tried to focus, forming shapes that were half letters, half faces, half memories. He realized with a chill that these were records, not of the dead, but of the living maps of attention. Grief, regret, fear, longing. The town did not simply exist. It was built on human awareness. Each mind that wandered into it, strengthening its roots, feeding its branches, creating new corridors, new reflections, new voices, and then a story emerged from the shadows. It spoke in layered tones, simultaneously male and female, old and young. Black Hollow had not begun as a town. It had begun as a single act of obsession. Centuries ago, a mana preacher, perhaps something else, had buried his grief in the desert. He had lost his family to fire, or flood, or disease. No records survived, only the memory of sorrow. And that grief, nurtured over decades, took shape. It formed a consciousness that could observe, remember, and reproduce. It learned to shape reality slowly, patiently, extending itself outward until it became a town, a mirror, a trap for anyone who wandered too close. The town collected identity, folded it in on itself, and multiplied endlessly. Each visitor was both victim and contributor, feeding the town's awareness. Ethan felt a presence behind him. He spun around, but no one was there, only the shadows moving along the walls. And yet he sensed them, countless minds watching, waiting, cataloging his fear and curiosity. One whispered, "You think you can understand, but understanding is a trap." Another added, "To know Black Hollow is to become part of it." And that was the truth. The town did not need violence. It did not need death. It only needed attention, awareness, observation. Every heartbeat, every thought, every memory became a brick in its architecture. The more Ethan struggled, the more he reinforced it. The deeper he sank into its roots, the closer he came to being absorbed completely. But even as panic tightened around him, a spark remained, a memory of his own life that had not been touched. He remembered the desert beyond the town, the bright sunlight that existed outside Black Hollow's reach, the laughter of friends long forgotten, the sound of wind over sand dunes. That spark ignited resistance, and suddenly he understood something crucial. The town's power was absolute only for those who surrendered completely. Awareness of self-memory that remained independent was its weakness. Ethan turned toward the tree. He could hear the voices now, thousands of them, overlapping, whispering in unison. Stay, remember, belong. But he could also hear his own heartbeat, steady and defiant. And then he spoke aloud, his voice cutting through the chorus. You do not own me. For a moment, the world faltered. The branches of the tree quivered. Mirrors trembled. Shadows recoiled. The whispers grew frantic, layering over each other in confusion, no longer synchronized. Ethan realized the terrifying truth. Black Hollow could not adapt instantly. It could manipulate and absorb, yes, but if confronted with active resistance, awareness that refused to yield, it could be even if temporarily. And in that pause, for a fleeting instant, he glimpsed the edge of the town, the faint outline of desert beyond the mausoleum, a path that might lead out, if he could reach it before the town remembered how to hold him completely. Ethan stepped back from the tree, feeling the pull of 1,000 invisible hands reaching for him. The roots stretched across the floor like living veins, curling around the stone pillars of the mausoleum, anchoring themselves into his mind with every heartbeat. He realized, with sickening clarity, that Black Hollow didn't just want him to stay, wanted him to forget he had ever existed outside its streets. Every step he took was a test, every thought a trap, even the act of remembering the desert. The wind, the sun beyond the town, felt dangerous, as though defiance itself was visible to the town, and now he had to be subtle, silent, careful. From the shadows along the walls, figures began to emerge. They weren't the vague reflections or half-formed echoes he had seen before. These were people, or what had once been people, twisted into a form of existence, both alive and dead. Their eyes were pale and reflective, faces familiar yet distorted, and they walked slowly toward him, moving in unnatural synchronicity. One stepped forward, his own face, grinning mockingly, and whispered in a voice he recognized as his own, "You cannot leave." Ethan didn't run. He couldn't. Movement alone would draw attention, anchor him further into the town. Instead, he forced himself to focus on the memory of something the town could not touch. A single night in his childhood, lying under a tree far from here, listening to the wind in the leaves. He clung to the details, the smell of grass, the creaking branches, the faint taste of cold air, and the figures faltered, their steps losing coherence, their voices fragmenting. Then came the first voices of the older residents, the souls who had been trapped the longest. They appeared in pockets of shadow along the corridors, their faces lined with centuries of awareness, eyes hollow but intelligent. One, a woman in tattered clothing, approached and spoke slowly. "You can't fight it alone. It doesn't care for your struggle, only that you exist. But if you understand it, if you see its patterns, perhaps you can survive." Another, a man with half of his face missing, as though eaten by shadow, added, "We tried before, all of us, and we failed. But you still remember yourself. That is your power." Ethan realized they were teaching him, guiding him, not out of kindness, but necessity. The town's hunger was insatiable. If even one visitor found the cracks in its control, it could unravel its structure, lose access to the memory energy it had collected, and collapse, or worse, retaliate in ways beyond comprehension. The tree pulsed in response, a heartbeat that reverberated through the corridors, shaking the walls. Mirrors rippled, reflections splintering into jagged fragments. The whispers intensified, layering over themselves until the sound was unbearable. Thousands of voices, overlapping, crying, laughing, pleading, screaming, all forming a single thought: stay, stay, stay. Ethan took a deliberate step forward, toward the center of the mausoleum, toward the base of the tree. The shadows tried to block him, but he forced his attention onto his own awareness, onto memory and identity. He visualized every detail he could remember outside of Black Hollow: the sand beyond the town, the smell of the desert wind, the sun on his skin, the sound of distant traffic far from these streets. The tree reacted violently, roots writhing, shadows flailing, mirrors shattering into pieces that fell upward, as if gravity itself had reversed. And then he heard Ita's voice unlike the others, deep and layered, ancient, emanating from every corner of the town simultaneously. "You are nothing outside me. You are mine." But Ethan's defiance grew. He focused not on fighting the town, but on reminding himself of who he was. Names, faces, sensations, emotions, every fragment of his life that the town had not yet touched, not yet recorded. And with each memory he claimed, the roots loosened, the shadows faltered, the whispers fractured. He realized the town's power depended entirely on surrender, on compliance, on the willingness of its inhabitants to forget themselves. For the first time, a path appeared. The mausoleum dissolved slightly, revealing a corridor he had never noticed, leading outward. The older spirits whispered, "Go. Go now. Do not hesitate. Keep yourself whole." But as he moved, the tree lashed with roots like tentacles, walls bending, mirrors stretching, shadows reaching. He felt the tug of the town's consciousness, pulling at him, trying to unmake him, trying to fold him into its archive. And in that moment, as the echoes of thousands of trapped lives pressed in, Ethan understood something vital. Escaping Black Hollow would not mean fleeing the streets or the shadows, or even the town itself. It would mean maintaining himself, memory, identity, awareness against a force that lived entirely on the absence of these things. The fight was not physical. It was psychological, spiritual, existential. Every heartbeat, every thought, every recall of who he was became a weapon, and every doubt, every lapse in memory was a trap. With deliberate focus, he ran, not from the town, but through himself, holding tightly onto every fragment of life outside the town, and toward a faint light at the far end of the corridor and exit, or at least the promise of one. The shadows recoiled, the mirrors quivered, and the tree's pulse slowed, but the whispers never ceased. "Stay, remember, belong, you are ours." Ethan reached the doorway. Beyond it, the desert stretched faintly, real and tangible, sunlight piercing through dust and haze. But behind him, he felt the town shift, the awareness of centuries bending, probing, reaching. Black Hollow had not lost him yet. It never would entirely, but for the first time in centuries. It had met resistance it could not immediately absorb, and somewhere, deep beneath the foundations, the tree pulsed slowly, patiently, waiting for the next visitor to wander into its streets, ready to begin the cycle again. The desert beyond Black Hollow seemed almost real, but Ethan felt its edges twist and shift, as if the town still reached out, tugging at the corners of reality. The sand underfoot was both soft and heavy, sometimes giving way beneath his boots, sometimes solid enough to feel like stone. In the distance, he saw the faint outline of the town, the crooked rooftops, the warped lampposts, the impossible angles of streets that had no logic. He realized with a jolt, Black Hollow's influence stretched farther than its walls, farther than its streets, farther than the mirrors, the shadows, or the reflections. It reached wherever someone remembered it, or even thought about it, feeding on awareness, growing stronger the more attention it received. As he walked, he heard voices again, though fainter than inside the mausoleum. These were older, sadder, more desperate, the echoes of visitors who had resisted and failed, who had wandered the streets for decades inside the town's layers, never leaving, never aging, trapped in half-formed lives. He saw them sometimes in the distance, like figures blurred by heat haze, a child sitting on a broken fence, a man pacing endlessly in circles, a woman who seemed to vanish whenever he tried to approach. Each one carried an air of warning, yet also inevitability, as if they understood that Black Hollow was patient and eternal, and resistance alone might only delay absorption, never prevent it. He began noticing landmarks in the desert, a half-buried chapel, its spire leaning, the doors open but empty inside, a dried-up well, circular and black, emitting faint whispers, a wooden bridge spanning a trench of sand that wasn't really there, collapsing under the weight of memory itself. At each point, Ethan felt the town trying to lure him back, tugging at his mind with recollections, half-truths, whispers of regret. And always, the tree's heartbeat pulsed beneath the ground, a reminder that no matter how far he moved, the town had a root in him now. Eventually, he came across an old windmill, its blades broken, casting jagged shadows across the sand. Inside, there were faint traces of previous visitors, footprints that vanished in mid-step, torn clothing, scattered notebooks with scribbled names, dates, and cryptic messages. And here, for the first time, he found signs of the town's origin. The journals spoke of a preacher or settler, centuries ago, who had lost his family to fire and grief, who had buried his sorrow deep in the desert and unknowingly nurtured the seed of something unnatural. The entries described visions, strange architecture, and voices in the wind calling out names of the departed. Over time, the settlement grew, fed by those who wandered in, turning grief into awareness, awareness into control, and control into an eternal, patient consciousness that could stretch its influence beyond its physical boundaries. And then the shadows appeared, not faint, not flickering, but solid, dark as ink, and impossibly dense. They came from the edges of the desert, moving toward him in waves. But they weren't hostile, not yet. They were curious. They had been observing, waiting to see if he would falter, if he would succumb to distraction or despair. Some of them wore his face, others wore faces he thought he recognized from the town, and a few seemed entirely unfamiliar, older than time itself. He realized, in terror, that these weren't just manifestations, they were fragments of the town itself, extensions of its consciousness sent outward to test, track, and, if necessary, reclaim him. Ethan ran, not in panic, but deliberately, keeping his focus tight on memories outside the town, his family, friends, the wind across the open desert, the distant hum of civilization. Each memory strengthened his own presence, countering the pull of the shadows. Still, the town fought back, warping the sand, bending the horizon, turning night into day and back again, creating illusions of roads that led nowhere, dunes that swallowed footprints, and structures that rose and fell in impossible sequences. He knew the truth. Escape would not be simple. Black Hollow could follow, always, as long as someone remembered it. It could whisper through reflections, stretch across miles of desert, reach through consciousness itself. Its power was vast, patient, eternal. But the spark of self-awareness, the deliberate act of remembering one's life, one's identity, one's reality outside the town, was a weakness it had never fully conquered. As he neared a faint glimmer of sunlight on the horizon, a single figure stepped into his path, a tall woman, pale, translucent, eyes empty yet sorrowful. She did not speak, but her presence radiated warning. He knew instantly. She was a visitor who had resisted before, who had almost escaped, and who now existed as a bridge between Black Hollow and the outside. She pointed toward the horizon, then vanished, and Ethan understood the final piece. To survive, he could not merely flee. He had to carry himself beyond the town, beyond its reach, and refuse to surrender his awareness, even if the town tried to follow him for decades, centuries, or longer. The desert stretched ahead, sun burning pale over sand and stone. Behind him, the edges of Black Hollow wavered, trembling like a living thing, aware it was losing its grip. And somewhere, beneath the foundations of the twisted town, The tree pulsed slowly, patiently, waiting for the next soul to wander too far to notice it. To return, Ethan trudged across the desert, feeling the town's pull like a distant heartbeat echoing through the sand. Behind him, Black Hollow's streets shimmered, bending the horizon, stretching impossibly wide, as if it were alive and aware he was trying to leave. The desert itself seemed to resist him, dunes shifting subtly, playing tricks on his memory, making him think he'd walked in circles. And then he felt it, not just a presence, but awareness, intelligent and ancient, pulsing beneath the ground, inside the air, inside his own mind. The town was watching him, testing him, waiting to see if he would falter. He stumbled across a formation of rocks that seemed unnatural, sharp, geometric, out of place among the rolling desert sands. Between them, he discovered an entrance, a tunnel carved into the stone, leading downward. Shadows shifted at the edges of his vision, some resembling people, others faceless, all moving with a purpose. He realized with dread that this must lead to the heart of Black Hollow, the origin of the tree, the source of the whispers, the central consciousness, and that whatever lay ahead was aware of him, waiting, shaping the path he had to walk. The tunnel descended into darkness, narrow at first, then widening into a cavern that pulsed faintly, illuminated by the glow of veins of light embedded in the walls. The air smelled of earth and decay, and he could hear faint whispers echoing off the stone, memories, regrets, fragments of life that had been folded into the town over centuries. Figures began to emerge from the walls, themselves trapped souls, older and more twisted than the shadows he had seen in the streets. Faces pale, eyes hollow, mouths moving silently, warning him, guiding him, or sometimes simply observing. One figure, a man older than memory itself, stepped forward and spoke in a dry, cracking voice. "You do not understand yet. This place is not evil, it is inevitable. It only takes what is given, and yet, you resist." Ethan forced himself to focus, clinging to the smallest fragments of his identity, the wind on the open desert, the sound of traffic far beyond the town, the memory of laughter, light, and life. Each recollection strengthened him, each moment of clarity weakened the town's hold. He realized that the tree at the town's core had grown from grief and obsession, fed by awareness, nourished by surrender. Resistance was not strength in itself, it was recognition. To remain aware of himself, to remember who he was outside Black Hollow, was to wound the town, to fracture its control. And then he saw it, the tree. Immense, gnarled, blackened, roots crawling along the cavern floor, veins of glowing light running through its bark, whispers emanating from every branch. And at its base, the oldest figures he had seen, the first visitors, settlers, perhaps even the original preachers, stood like guardians, their faces pale and lined, their eyes bright with faint recognition of him. One stepped forward. "You see now what we could not. The town is patience made flesh. It is memory, obsession, reflection, and it will never stop. Not entirely, but awareness. Awareness is its weakness." Ethan approached the tree, every step a battle against the tendrils of consciousness that lashed out, trying to pull him in, rewrite him, absorb him. Shadows reached from the walls, mirrors emerged from nowhere, and whispers layered over themselves into a deafening chorus. "Stay, remember, belong." He pressed his hands against the tree's bark, feeling the pulse of centuries of attention, grief, and obsession flowing through it. And then he spoke, steady, deliberate, aware. "I am more than this town. I exist outside you." The tree shivered violently, roots writhed, shadows screamed silently, mirrors splintered, and the cavern shook. The trapped souls recoiled, yet Ethan felt a shift, a momentary opening, a path of clarity through the chaos. He realized the town could reach for him, manipulate him, distort his perception, but it could not erase the parts of him that actively resisted, that refused to surrender to its reflections, its whispers, its shadows. He ran, following the corridor of light that opened before him. The tunnel stretching upward toward the desert, he remembered. Behind him, Black Hollow pulsed like a living organism, trying to reclaim him, trying to fold him back into its archive of memory. But he held on to himself. Each heartbeat, each recollection, each fragment of awareness, a tether pulling him away from its grasp. And as he emerged into the pale sunlight, the town's edges shimmered and wavered, no longer quite complete, no longer quite whole. Black Hollow had not lost him entirely. It never would, but for the first time in centuries, it had met resistance it could not immediately consume. It would wait, patient, eternal, ready to draw in the next wandering soul. But Ethan had proven that awareness could survive its grasp, at least for a time. The desert stretched before him, sun high, wind faint but real, and in the distance, the town flickered, shifting in impossible ways, but it had not followed him. For now, he was free, but the knowledge remained. Black Hollow would always exist, waiting, patient, hungry, and he would never forget it. Ethan sat on the edge of a sand dune, wind tugging at his hair, dust swirling around his boots. The sun burned pale across the desert, and for the first time in days or years, he felt the heat on his skin, the faint weight of the world outside Black Hollow. He looked back toward the town, now a distant shimmer on the horizon. It wavered like a mirage, crooked streets folding into themselves, the lampposts tilting impossibly, shadows moving along the edges, as if aware of him, patient and eternal. The town had not followed, not yet, but he knew, deep in his bones, that it could, whenever it wished, whenever it remembered him. The desert felt empty, but it was not. He sensed traces of the town in every shifting dune, faint echoes of voices buried beneath the wind, fragments of shadows that had once reached for him, and he realized something terrifying. Black Hollow did not need proximity to control him. It only needed awareness, a thought, a memory. Every time he blinked, every time he recalled its streets, the mirrors, the tree, the trapped faces, he was feeding it again, even if from afar. Survival was not escape, it was vigilance. Resistance was eternal, and the cost was constant awareness of what might be waiting beyond the horizon. He thought of the other visitors, the lost souls who had resisted or failed before him. The pale woman in the desert, the men in tattered clothing, the older figures at the tree. They were both warnings and guides. Some had surrendered completely, some had lingered, fragmented, in shadows between streets, corridors, reflections. And now, he carried that knowledge too, a mantle of awareness that weighed heavy. The town's hunger never slept. Its patience was infinite. He would never be free in the sense of forgetting. He would never step beyond the desert without feeling its pulse, hearing its whispers, seeing its shadows just beyond his vision. The wind carried a faint sound, subtle but unmistakable, a chorus of echoes, calling names, telling stories, whispering regrets. Black Hollow had learned him already, and yet he was still himself. He could still remember the desert beyond the town, the sun, the wind, the distant hum of life unclaimed by the town. That spark, fragile, flickering, human, was the one thing Black Hollow could not take without his consent. Awareness was the weapon, memory the shield, and defiance the only escape it could not fully claim. Ethan rose, brushing dust from his coat, and began walking toward a distant ridge. The desert stretched endlessly before him, the horizon bright with heat and possibility. He knew that every thought of Black Hollow, every recollection of streets, mirrors, shadows, and the gnarled tree pulsing beneath its foundation was a thread connecting him to it. The town had not lost him. It could never truly lose him. But for now, he had the choice to move forward, to exist beyond its immediate grasp, and somewhere, far beyond the ridge, beyond dunes and wind, the edges of Black Hollow shimmered faintly, patient and eternal, waiting for the next wanderer, waiting for awareness to wander too close, to notice, to remember, waiting to pull another fragment of life into its ever-growing, ever-hungry web. And the wind whispered faintly through the desert, carrying a single, terrifying promise. We will always remember you. Ethan kept walking. The sun climbed higher, and the desert stretched, infinite, silent, and free but never quite safe. Black Hollow. A western ghost story. Ethan arrived at the edge of the desert just as twilight draped the world in muted colors. A town appeared in the distance, crooked rooftops stretching against the horizon like teeth, lampposts leaning at impossible angles. The first sensation he felt was Unizan inexplicable dread that seeped into his bones. Black Hollow, as it was known in whispered stories, was alive in ways no living thing should be. It was not the wind, nor the sand, nor the heat that bothered him most, but the awareness that he was being observed, measured, catalogued, even as he stood outside its streets. The town's edges wavered like water, streets twisting subtly with every step he took. Shadows moved along the alleyways, stretching longer than possible, detaching themselves from walls and flickering lampposts. Mirrors in windows reflected him differently than reality. One moment his reflection was pale and gaunt, the next older, then smiling in ways he had never smiled. And always, the whispering began soft at first, then insistent, carrying fragments of his own thoughts. We know you. We've waited. Don't be afraid. By the second night, the town's subtle manipulations escalated. Ethan awoke in a motel room where the walls seemed to breathe, doors stretching and shrinking, mirrors multiplying, each reflecting something slightly wrong, his shadow sharper, his eyes darker, a grin that did not belong to him. The whispers grew more distinct. They spoke in his voice, anticipating his thoughts, revealing secrets he had never told. Every hallway led somewhere unfamiliar. Every step carried him back to a place he thought he had left behind. Black Hollow was patient, stretching its streets outward, claiming moments of time, bending reality around him. Inside the town's library, Ethan discovered books that described his life diary entries, letters, confessions he didn't remember writing. Each page shifted as he read, anticipating his thoughts, rewriting itself. Photographs lay scattered across tables, images of him sleeping, walking, even looking into mirrors taken by hands that had never existed. The town did not just reflect life, it consumed identity, folding visitors into its architecture, storing their essence in streets, shadows, reflections, and whispers. As he wandered further, he encountered figures, some vague smudges at first, then fully formed men, women, children, all frozen in mid-motion, all bearing faint familiarity. They watched him silently, urging him to move, their eyes following every step. He noticed a single recurring figure among them, a reflection of himself, moving independently, sometimes smiling, sometimes warning, sometimes beckoning, and always, beneath it all, a faint hum, the pulse of the town itself, patient, eternal. Ethan's exploration brought him to the town hall, its walls lined with portraits all of himself. Each captured a different expression: fear, curiosity, exhaustion, despair. The town had cataloged him, as it did with every visitor. On the table lay journals chronicling moments from his past he had tried to forget, childhood embarrassments, secret thoughts, fleeting regrets, and through it all, the mirrors, the shadows, and the whispers reminded him, "You belong here, you are ours." The diner appeared next, glowing unnaturally in the perpetual twilight. Its walls reflected possibilities rather than reality, corridors filled with fire, stormy cliffs, empty hallways, and lives he could have lived. Shadows moved from mirrors into the diner, figures from the town's archive of memory. The menu listed not food, but names, dates, and confessions, the town's way of serving the memories of the lost. Ethan realized that the diner was a central hub of the town's consciousness, a repository for identity, observation, and attention. He began to understand the truth. Black Hollow did not trap souls, nor did it kill. It absorbed awareness. Every visitor became a fragment of the town itself, their fears, hopes, regrets, and memories folded into its architecture, endlessly looping, endlessly observed. Resistance was possible, but it required awareness, deliberate memory, and constant vigilance. By the fifth day, Ethan reached the mausoleum, a cavernous structure beneath the town, housing the heart of Black Hollow, the gnarled, blackened tree whose roots spread through every corner of the town, connecting every reflection, every shadow, every whisper. Ancient figures, previous visitors trapped for centuries, warned him, awareness is your only weapon. Identity is your shield. Within the tree's presence, he confronted the full horror. Shadows lashed like tentacles, mirrors multiplied infinitely, and the whispers became deafening. But Ethan clung to memory's sunlight on a distant desert. Laughed long ago, the wind across open dunes. The tree pulsed violently, but could not entirely erase him. Awareness, he realized, fractured Black Hollow's control, weakened its grip, and revealed a narrow path to freedom. He emerged from the mausoleum into the desert beyond the town, the sun burning pale across sand and stone. Behind him, Black Hollow shimmered and pulsed like a living organism, aware, patient, waiting. The desert stretched endlessly, and Ethan moved forward, carrying memories, fragments of self, and the knowledge that Black Hollow's hunger was eternal, even now. He knew the truth. Escape was not permanent. Awareness, memory, and identity were the only defenses against the town. It could never stop him entirely, but it would always wait, always observe, always hunger. The whispers, the shadows, the reflections, they lingered at the edge of perception, waiting for a moment of doubt, a lapse in awareness. Black Hollow was eternal, patient, insatiable, and somewhere beneath its foundations, the tree pulsed slowly, reminding the world that those who wandered too close would always be noticed, cataloged, and remembered. Ethan walked into the desert, wind tugging at his hair, dust swirling across the dunes. Sunlight stretched long shadows over the sand. Behind him, Black Hollow shimmered, patient, eternal, hungry, but for now, he was free. Free to remember, free to exist, free to carry the spark of self-awareness beyond its reach. And somewhere, in the whisper of the wind, he heard it. We will always remember you.